Hello, welcome back to Braver New Worlds, a podcast about the stories we need to tell for the future we want to see. My name is Nathan Young. I am your host. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Obviously, I'm outside. I'm recording this outside, so people on YouTube can see that. It's a bit of a blustery day, so hopefully it doesn't mess up the mic. Today we're going to do a solo podcast, and part of the reason is just because, I thought it'd be fun to do, but the other part of the reason is I didn't have a guest this week. I didn't get an interview done in time this week. And maybe for some of those other folks out there that maybe you do podcasts also, you sort of realize that having a guest for a podcast each week, it's not just like finding a guest each week. It's a bit of a funnel. You got to lay some groundwork 3 months ago to get interviews for today. And, for whatever variety of reasons, my little funnel came up short. And I will say part of the reason is because I've just had a lot going on these last couple of weeks, very positive things. One of the main things is I started an event series here in San Diego called Big Idea Night. And so if you're here in town, I'd love for you to come check it out. On a lot of levels, it is a sort of like live version of this podcast where I'm getting different leaders from within the community here, a lot of the same people that have been on this podcast, to come up on stage and share, big important ideas, something that they believe will move our world forward, get us to a better place as a community, as a society, as a spinning ball of rock flying around in the universe. And have them come up on stage and they share their ideas, share their story, share a little bit about who they are and what they really want to see put forward in the world. And it kind of segues into what I'll talk about here, because a lot of my work is about storytelling, as you've probably figured out by now. When I say storytelling, it's not just like once upon a time there was a prince who lived in a castle and he slayed a dragon or whatever it is. It's more about how to tell a story as a leader. And through that story, communicate a vision and something that can get people excited, feeling something, wanting to work with you, wanting to believe in you, and developing some empathy for the point of view that you're sharing. These are the people I work with in the type of work I do, whether as an individual leader or with a team. And a lot of times I will work with really interesting people that have done a lot of very valuable things out there in the world. They've made their communities better in so many ways. They've been very effective. But now when it comes time to tell a story for a really key moment in their life or in their career or in the work that they're doing, they need help. And it's not uncommon to need help. And even the best have coaches. So if you've got an important talk coming up, an important pitch, obviously you probably want to at least run it by someone, if not get a coach to help you work on that. But a lot of times too, the gravity of the situation, like the leadership role that somebody might be stepping into, is going to require some elevation of those skills of how to communicate who you are as a leader, or the opportunity that they want to create is going to require a little bit more of a persuasive pitch. And all of that comes down to storytelling. I'm going to share a little bit about why that is so important here today. And that really is the thread that pulls everything through in the work I do, because I'm always telling the people I have speak and the people in this podcast, I'm always liking to hear them tell a story. And it's a story about who they are, what they're working on, and where they're trying to go. And this is important because this is how we as humans are hardwired to perceive information. There's that quote by Maya Angelou that's like, the world is not composed of atoms, the world is composed of stories, something like that. And that's really it. Like, the world is doing whatever the world is doing, and we make up stories to make it make sense. Everything we see, everything we do, everything we perceive, we try to slot it all into a narrative that justifies why it's there, how it got there, and what it's going to do there from here on out. And it tells us also how to interact with it. You can see this in news media. They always have a sort of default narrative that they fall back to. It's sort of like a institutional narrative. There'll be sort of built-in good guys and bad guys that'll be talking about on the news, innocent civilians and terrorists, Western democracies and Eastern countries, successful business people and moochers on the system, right? These are all sort of code words for a certain frame of understanding the world that's almost embedded in our culture and in the way that we think about the situations that we're in. Because as I shared each one of those examples there, you probably had a quick little picture in your mind of like who those people might be or what that idea might represent. And whether it's true or not, that's obvious, like these things are based on some truth, but there's also very much simplified. And that goes back to the way that we as humans take information and we slot it into a story. This is what I'm going to talk about in this podcast here today, is to give my pitch for the importance of storytelling and then how do you tell a valuable leadership story. And I'm not going to get all the way into it here because I just don't want to go that far into it this time. I'm just going to save it for the next time. If I have to do another one of these solo episodes next week, we'll go a step deeper than we go this week. And so I want to start with this question of like, why do we tell stories? Or how did storytelling gain this primacy in the way that we as humans operate in the world? And I'm going to put forward a pretty radical idea here, but I think it's pretty backed up, is that storytelling is our human manifestation of instincts. And what do I mean by this? Going to school, we learned that animals have instincts, and that's how they operate in the world. Us as humans, we don't have instincts. We're smarter than that, and so we operate differently in the world. But we never really explored, like, why do humans operate the way that they do? But think about it. An animal's instincts tell it how to survive in the world. That's what they're for. A baby gazelle is born, and it's like, "Ooh, you better run, gazelle." Lion's going to come and eat you quick. It knows how to do that as soon as it's born, or maybe it needs a couple minutes. Dolphins are born knowing how to swim. If you have a dog or cat, you see the behaviors in them. Your dog sees a squirrel. It's like, oh, I got to get that squirrel. And it's just these automatic behaviors that are triggered in them by certain stimuli, and they go. And those behaviors are ingrained in them because that is how they, as a species, have survived to be at this place that they're in the world now. And on one hand, it's a very powerful way for them to operate. These species have gotten all the way to this point in world history to be alive today, but it has its flaws too, and that's very limited. Most animals are born with a code for how to operate, and if that code doesn't work in the world they're born into, they're just not going to survive. And some animals are adaptable. They have like crows and coyotes. And yeah, part of that is because they're clever. And part of that too is because their code they were born with suited them to a lot broader set of circumstances. Humans are different. And why are we different? What makes us different is our intelligence. And I would say it's more of our cognitive abilities. Our ancient ancestors evolved cognition. As they evolved more cognition, they developed more advantages of cognition, necessitating even more cognition and more advantages from that more cognition. And this became a sort of cycle of like more cognition, more advantages of cognition, needing more cognition, getting more cognition, more advantages of cognition. And it would go on and on and on. But what happened to our ancestors too is they became very adaptable to new environments. Starting in Africa, they spread across the globe as one species. And that's not something that happens very often. And it's because we evolved to be adaptable. But what is the mechanism of adaptability? The mechanism is storytelling. Because human babies aren't born knowing how to run or knowing how to swim or able to eat solid food. Human babies can't do much of anything for the first year or two. They're dependent on their parents, their primary caregivers. And what happens to us as we get older, we have our instincts. Obviously, we want to eat and we want to be close to who we see as our primary caregivers. Obviously, those are ingrained in us. But we also have to operate in a society, in a culture. And this is one of the other human great evolutionary advantages is we developed as a communal species. So we always live and work in communities. And part of what we need to learn is how to survive in that community. This is what we go to school for. This is what we're taught by our parents and by our caregivers and by the community that we grow up in. We're given a code rather than a code based on instincts that we're born with. We're given a code based on stories that tell us how to live, how to survive, how to fit in, how to be accepted in the community, and even be successful in that community. Because evolutionarily speaking, if our ancestors weren't able to fit into the community they were born in, they got ostracized and they died. Nowadays, it's not quite the case. It gets a little bit lonely. It creates challenges if you can't fit into the community that you were born into. But you can find another community too. And a lot of times you find a better community. But much like those instincts, these codes that we learn in the forms of stories about what a man's supposed to be, what a woman's supposed to be, how children are supposed to act, how adults are supposed to act, what a father's supposed to be like, what a mother's supposed to be like, who you're supposed to give respect to, the value of being smart, being athletic, being personable. These are all the codes that we learn to fit into our society. These are the stories we are taught to help us survive. This creates a tension, and Brene Brown talked about this tension a lot, this tension between authenticity and fitting in. And I think a lot of us find ourselves caught there to where we feel this real intense drive to fit in sometimes, even if we don't necessarily want to fit in, or even if we don't even know why we want to fit in. But straying from the norm in our world feels scary. It feels scarier than the reality of it might be if we think about it logically. And this is where we develop a lot of unhealthy behaviors. Things like people pleasing, the ways we get unhealthily attached to potential lovers or love interests, the way we might bond with an abusive person, the way we might still adhere to the rules and dictates of our parents, even though we're grown adults, the way we might be afraid of stepping up and sharing who we are and really speaking out for ourselves or advocating for ourselves, the way it might be scary to get up on stage in front of a bunch of people and share who you are and what matters to you. And do you ever notice what happens to you in those moments when you are in that situation, when you do need to tell someone that you're upset with them, or you need to have a difficult conversation, or you need to stand up for yourself? What happens? Your heart starts to race. You get all kind of clammy and sweaty. You get nervous. You just want to run and hide and not say the thing that you know you need to say. You might imagine scenarios where the person you're talking to just completely blows up and you get this worst case scenario outcome. You might even catch yourself getting angry at being in the position of having to stand up for yourself, of having to do it. You'll say things like, oh, I don't even want to be friends with that person anyways. I don't want to have anything to do with that person anyways. Why am I working so hard for that person's approval? Or even when we find ourselves in a relationship and we're having some tensions in the relationship, we feel that pit in our gut. We might hyperventilate if we feel like we've upset our love interest or we're going to lose a person that's close to us in that way. And I don't mean to diminish these things. They can be big deals for us and they can be really difficult aspects of living our lives. But on some level too, we're going to be okay, right? especially in like our Western American society, we're going to be okay. But we get these really intense reactions, and not just in our heads. We're not just thinking this stuff. We're feeling this stuff all over in our bodies. And this is what I'm getting at, because what you're experiencing essentially is a fight-flight response. You're getting all the instinctual responses to danger that an animal might get in this world, because we're animals too, by the way. You're getting those instinctual responses to danger from having to encounter a difficult social scenario in your world. Maybe a social scenario where you're breaking from that story that you learned growing up. You're breaking from that code. And so you might get angry. That's the fight instinct. You might not take that anger out on the person that you need to talk to. You might actually take that anger out on yourself, but it's the fight instinct nonetheless. You might want to run and hide. You might get jittery. That's the flight instinct. You might get kind of overwhelmed and get almost like catatonic and just like almost get tired and frozen and not really sure what to do. That's the freeze instinct. And there's another instinct that kind of showed up recently, the fawn instinct. They just chose as like another F, but basically it's an instinct to get closer to somebody with leadership and power as a way to be safe. So this is where like kind of people pleasing comes in. And so yeah, here you are at this moment where you have to have a difficult conversation and you have a set of instincts that runs through your body, by the way, that makes you feel like your life is in danger, like you might die, all because you're daring to break the story or narrative-based code that's been instituted in you since childbirth for how you're supposed to live in this world that you've been born into. You're supposed to adapt and survive in the community that you grew up in. When I say community, it made like bigger thing. You're sort of growing up in a small community of people, but that community is also the trajectory you're on through school, college, the workplace you're in, all of that. And so your stories are embodied. They're really a part of your body. And they're connected to your instincts. This is what I mean. Stories are the manifestation of instincts in humans. And the way this might have emerged for our ancient ancestors is as they were encountering new situations and new scenarios, as they expanded all over the world, they had to adopt a new set of behaviors to adapt to that scenario. And the way they communicated those behaviors back to themselves and to the rest of the people in their tribe or group or community was through stories. And this is a cognitive tool of like understanding the situation, and it might even show up in the kind of things like fables and folklore where there's stories that are told for an entertainment person, but they also set some dictates for how to live. But they also are from the most simple, basic concept of a story that exists, and it's cause and effect. If I do this, I'll get that outcome. And so we start to see the world in this sort of cause and effect scenario. And so our ancient ancestors, like even like pre-Homo sapien ancient ancestors, were very much adopting this concept of cause and effect in their cognitive abilities to understand the world and how they could survive and adapt to it. And all animals have this to a certain extent. If you have a dog or a cat, they kind of know certain signals that cue like, oh, I'm about to get fed right now. But what the storytelling enabled our ancient ancestors to do with each other, especially the ones that stepped up to a leadership position, was to propose a new set of cause and effect dynamics to share for how to survive in a new environment. Maybe in their previous environment, they were hunting food by running out there and trying to spear a rabbit by themselves. But maybe they get this new environment that doesn't work. And one of the people in the group says, I got a different idea. What if I chase the rabbits through the bushes and you guys all wait in the other end and get the rabbits? They're proposing a scenario, a cause and effect, a little story. But then these stories would evolve into like, okay, what if we organized our culture and society this way? What if we decided who was in charge that way? What if this set of people were in charge of this and that set of people were in charge of that? These little hypothetical story scenarios that ancient leaders were putting forward. And over countless millennia, here's where we are today. And so on one level, that's what you as a leader has to do now. You want to be putting forward these scenarios, but our world's much more complicated than that. And so it's not going to be quite as simple as that story. But at the same time, we're actually not quite as complicated as we think. Our genetics have not changed that much from the very first Homo sapiens. In fact, I think they're exactly the same. And these are people that lived on the planet for hundreds of thousands of years before developing cars and asphalt and plastic and microphones and computers and podcasts. This is all new stuff that we've had to figure out. And we tell ourselves a story about how to use all this stuff. But at the end of the day, our cognitive abilities are basically the same as they were for our earliest ancestors. And we use storytelling the same way too. And here's where I'm going to sort of shift it to really get into a deeper argument of what storytelling is and how you as a leader need to tell stories. Because stories are about two things and two things only: trust and predictability. Those are the two things that we as a species are looking for from the stories we're sharing and the stories that we're taking in. And that might seem like a crazy oversimplification, but let me get into it here. So as I said before, we evolved in community, right? And the world was much more dangerous for our early ancestors. They really needed that community to survive. But also, how could they count on that community? How could they know that that community was the people that had their backs? At one point, it's probably like, they were all relatives, so that's part of it. But as larger communities and societies evolved, they had to find new ways of bringing communities together into something that was cohesive, that had everybody working together on the same page. And even as there was ups and downs, people were bought into a concept, a story of what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be working together. And that created trust. Because if everybody else is bought into the same story as you, that gives you a little more confidence that you can trust these people. And what are these stories? These stories could be the religions, the mythologies of different cultural groups. The stories could be the stories of like who they are as people, the sort of nationalistic stories that they have. If you're watching this on the video, you see this American flag behind me here. We have stories about America, about the founding fathers, about the Revolution, about the Civil War. These are stories that paint us as a sort of a magnanimous and forward-thinking set of people that developed the first democracy of its era and spread democracy all over the globe and became like the biggest, most powerful country and economy ever just because God willed it that way. That's the story of America, right? I say that facetiously. But again, there's some truth to it. There's the founding fathers, maybe it was a pretty cool idea at the time and it was very different and new and it had its flaws, but there's some truth to it. These stories do stick because they all have some truth, but they also have some embellishments. But it creates a thing that we all believe. And so we believe in the righteousness and the virtue and the valor of America. And because of that, we have trust in what America does. We believe in this system that we're all living in of having elections every 4 years for president and every 2 years for House of Representatives, and that our vote counts towards something, and that this representative form of government will somehow suit our needs. And this is part of what keeps the order. This is part of what makes American society work, is because we've all subscribed to this story of what America is and how America operates and what makes this world work. That's trust. And then that gets back to us individually. We think of how are we supposed to live our lives? Well, we're supposed to get a job and we're supposed to make money and we're supposed to pull our weight in society, maybe get a house, have kids. And if you work hard and you get the right job and you do good work, then things will work out for you in this society. We set forward paths that we're supposed to follow. And there's trust that if we follow that path, it'll work for us. We also have trust in the people in our community. We trust that they, are looking out for our interests, or at least aren't looking out against our interests. They're not going to turn on us. Part of what develops that trust is when we see that we believe the same things as each other. You might have liberal or conservative political points of view, and you're going to obviously trust somebody that has the same political points of view as you. If you're a member of a faith, a Christian faith, you're going to have some trust in another member of this Christian faith more than you might have trust in a member of a different faith or a member of a non-faith. And we tend to work with each other and build our projects and build our lives around people that we trust. And this trust is essentially like we all believe in the same story. And you're probably seeing in our political world right now as that sort of like larger trust of what is America and how is the system working and do we all believe in this? Is that trust is breaking down. You see us fracturing off into different things that we're trusting and finding communities around these different areas of trust than maybe we would have before. There's not like a unified America as much anymore. And you could argue whether it's a trust breakdown or just more stories getting put out into the ether, more perspectives, but either way, it comes down to stories and trust. These stories create the framework for which we decide who and what to trust in the world. And then the other one I said is predictability. And this goes back to instincts there too. Every species on this planet is just all trying to figure out how to survive. That's what we're all doing. At the end of the day, that's just what's going on. We're trying to survive. And as civilized human beings, we've tied our survival to these like bigger, broader stories. But survival is based on predictability. We want to know what's going to happen next so we can avoid danger. And one of the ways that we communicate to ourselves and develop an understanding of the world around us is through storytelling. And what these stories do is help us predict what's going to happen next. They tell us if we do this, we're going to get that outcome. Is that an outcome that we want or not? If we operate this way, these things are going to happen. If we operate that way, those things are going to happen. And sometimes they might not even be the best options. They might lead to outcomes that are objectively bad for us, but we want the outcomes that we trust. We want that predictability more than anything else because we have it ingrained deep in our nervous system that predictability is safety and safety is survival. We're not going to give that up for anything. And for good reason. It worked. It got us here. We survived. As an organism, we're still alive, operating off the story that we've been operating on. So why change it? That's what your body's saying. Yeah, so the stories we tell is all about how we communicate to ourselves who and what to trust and what's going to happen next. And now maybe you might be thinking to yourself like, wait a minute, Nathan, there's more to storytelling than just trust and predictability. There's also like entertainment and meaning making. Like you forgot those. Those fit in somewhere, don't they? And I would argue that they do, but they're part of trust and predictability. And here's how. So entertainment is interesting, and I think it's sort of a byproduct of our affinity to storytelling that we've developed storytelling as entertainment too. But if you think about it, a lot of the stories that are told, even when they're told as entertainment, do share a perspective on the world that we internalize. I think of things like rom-coms and the way they put forward this certain way that you're supposed to date and you're supposed to develop a love interest or love relationship in your life. I haven't watched that many rom-coms, but the couple that I have watched, just like it looked nothing like anything I experienced in the formation of a relationship at all. Like a lot of times it was like actually quite creepy, like what not to do to try and get someone to like you. I mentioned earlier this, the idea of fables. Fables were stories told to children as a way of telling them how to operate in the world. There's the stories of like the witches that live in the forest, and these were told to children to tell them like, don't go into the forest. And sometimes these stories got subverted and the kids were smarter than the parents, and that was all good fun. But it really was about like sharing lessons and perspectives on how the world's supposed to work and how we're supposed to operate in the world to survive through those stories that were told. There's also a sort of soothing predictability to stories that were told as entertainment too, right? Like they usually follow some predictable story patterns and typical story arcs that are helpful for us because they create some trust and predictability in how the story is going to unfold. And even when they defy that predictability, even when they turn it around, that still sort of like plays with that idea of predictability and trust that we like and we gravitate to and that we have adopted as like the value of storytelling. You see like a lot of religions too. They're all almost all of our religions are based off stories, and they tell stories about how we're supposed to be and who we're supposed to be. And so that all creates trust. Even if it's a bit of a coercive trust, it's trust. And then with regards to meaning making, I mean, that is predictability. That's what we need from the stories we tell. We're trying to tell stories to make sense of our world, to give it meaning. And because we're looking for predictability, we're looking for some sort of understanding of why things are happening the way they are and how we fit into that. Side note, this is why studies say like conspiracy theories emerge when the world gets chaotic, because we're just looking for something to trust, to hold on to help make life predictable. And that sort of counterintuitively, that trust, that predictability can come from some crazy conspiracy theory about some cabal that's out to get us or something, or they're manipulating things behind the scene. That can be a little bit more of a soothing set of predictable ways the world is operating than to just get comfortable with the chaos of a world sort of spinning out of control for a little while. So what does this all mean for how we tell stories as leaders then? So it was a big setup, and now I'm kind of getting to like the big piece here, the payoff of how we need to be thinking about stories as leaders. And I encounter a lot of leaders, like they want to kind of tell their life story. They want to share the important work that they've done. They want to put forward those case studies, and that's all valuable. That all has its use because, yeah, that does create sort of trust and predictability. The best predictor of future outcomes is past occurrences, right? So if you say, I got this outcome before, I'll probably get it again, that's a good story to tell for creating some predictability and for creating some trust. But I'm going to argue that in these times that we're living in now, we need something more because we are seeing a lot of things breaking down structurally. That big story that we're all trusting in our world is starting to break down. New stories are going to start getting told. And if today's leaders aren't saying what that new story is going to be, then whoever is talking about the story is going to win. Their story is going to become the one story that we live under and not the new story that it could be. Because what that new story is doing is it's creating predictability. Now, there's a chance there, like you're asking people to take a leap, but you're painting that vision of what could lie ahead. You're like that cave person however many years ago that said, hey, what if we hunted bison this way instead of that way? You're presenting a new path, a new alternative. And this is what we need from leaders right now. Now, this is going to require some boldness, some stepping out in front of crowds, saying some unpopular things. If you're anything like me, you're looking at this world around us and you're seeing like so many things that are not working. You're seeing us on, a really bad path of this system that we're in, not lasting that much longer. And something's got to change. Something's got to fix. It can't be this anymore. This is fine right now. I mean, look, everything looks great right here where I'm at right at this very moment. But we all know the world's getting hotter. We all know that these economies are getting unsustainable. We all know that we're exploiting the land and each other more than it's going to be sustainable in the long term. There's going to be some price to pay. And so we do need a new story for how we can be living that we can adopt before that day comes. So as a leader, like, what is your vision? What is this new story that you want to put forward? And you don't have to figure out the whole world. You could just do a new story about your place in the world. I'm currently in a yard with mostly native plants here in San Diego. This is a good story. This is part of how we could be moving forward by creating more natural habitats built into suburbia. And that's just one story. We're all going to have our stories, and we're going to be sharing those stories too about the world that we want to see and why this world is important, and try to get some people excited about the story that we have to share. And so how does this come back to like trust and predictability? So that trust piece is that like you, like the person that you're communicating with, understand that something's got to change. We're on the same page there. That creates trust. We also want the world to get better in a certain set of ways. That's another area where we're on the same page. That creates more trust. And we also want to back up and share stories about who we are and like where we came from and how we got to this place and how we got to these conclusions that we got to. That creates trust. And these ideas we put forth, they show us as somebody that, like, cares about humanity. That that creates trust too. And then with the predictability, I like the predictability is this path, this new path you're trying to create. And maybe it is a perspective predictability, but it is a predictability nonetheless. Part of what you're predicting is if we don't do this, we're going to get that. That's a prediction you're sharing. Then that's going to be a prediction that a lot of your audience will share too. That if we keep going on the path we're on, there's going to be bad things. So we need to go on a new path. So as much as you want to tell a story about like, this is what I did, this is what we did, this is what we created, you also want to be telling the story of like, what is possible? What can we create here? And this story can be exciting. It can be inspiring. It could help people believe in you and your cause and what you're trying to put forward. And it can give people hope. And that hope is very, very powerful too. And by being the person that stands up and shares this story, you might be worried about what other people are going to think. You're probably going to get some pushback from some sectors of your world. But by other sectors, you're going to be the brave person that stood up and said it. That's going to be more trust. You're going to be saying the thing that everybody's thinking, but nobody's actually saying. But that's what leadership is, right? Is taking that bold step where nobody else is taking it. And so what this comes down to is the story that we as leaders need to tell from this day forward is this is who I am. This is who we are. This is what we believe. This is what we want to create. Stick with me, work with me, believe in you, believe in us. And this is where we'll go together. That's the story we need to be telling now. That's what we want to be putting out into the world. This is what we need from leaders at this moment here. How are you going to get us through this crazy mess we're in now and lead us to a better future? That is the story that we want to hear from leaders right now. So how you tell that story is you share who you are, what you believe in, what you value. You bring your community together based on those ideas, and you set forth the idea for what you want to create and how you want to create it and how it'll come together by everybody working together. So the challenge I want to give you today, maybe try to tell that story somewhere in some little way this week, see how it comes out. And maybe you're like, I don't even know where to begin. I don't even know how to tell that story. Well, yeah, fair enough. It's not easy. And next time the opportunity for this solo podcast comes up, which might be next week, I'll get a little bit more into how to tell that story. So anyways, that's it for now. Hopefully you enjoyed this solo podcast edition of Braver New Worlds. And we will see you again next week.